My name is Ona Jordan, and I am 58 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood at the edge of my daughter's wedding, in a room with 400 guests and a string quartet. And her new father-in-law lifted one manicured finger, pointed it at me across the dance floor, and told the whole room, "The help eats in the kitchen." I had raised that daughter alone. 2 jobs, 24 years, 1,000 double shifts. And there I was, in a dress I had sewn by hand, being sent to the back like a woman who'd wandered in off the service road. But what I said next, one sentence, into that microphone, froze 400 people where they sat. Nobody breathed. Let me take you back, because you need to understand how a woman like me ended up standing in a room like that. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quiet ones finally speak, and the people who counted on their silence learn what it cost. If a story ever made you sit up straighter, you belong here. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I have spent 30 years in a hospital kitchen. 6 in the morning, I punch a clock and start feeding people I will never meet. Broth for the ones who can't chew. Trays for the ones who can't stand. Coffee for the nurses who look as tired as I feel. My hands tell the story better than I can. There is a burn scar across 2 knuckles from a steam pan, and my fingertips are rough from 30 winters of needlework. Because the kitchen was only the first job. At night, I took in sewing, hems and alterations, and the occasional wedding gown, and on weekends I cleaned offices downtown after the lights went off. Claire's father left when she was 2 years old. He did not die. He did not fight. He simply decided that a wife and a baby were a weight he had not agreed to carry, and one Tuesday the closet was half empty, and that was that. I did not chase him. My own mother, who scrubbed other people's floors until her back gave out, had told me one thing I never forgot, and I said it to myself in the dark that Tuesday night with a colicky baby on my shoulder. We don't beg for a seat, we build our own table. So, that is what I did. I built a small table in a small house, and I filled it with the only child I would ever have, and I told myself that if I worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough, one day the world would look at us and decide we were enough. I believed that for a very long time. I want you to remember that I believed it, because that belief is the thing this story takes apart. Claire grew up good. Not perfect, not soft, but good in the way that costs something. She did her homework at the kitchen counter while I ran the sewing machine. She took a scholarship, then a job in marketing, and she never once made me feel like the free clinic dentist or the second-hand coat was a thing to be ashamed of. When she was 25, she called me on a Sunday, and I could hear the smile before she said a word. "Mom," she said, "I met someone. His name is Ethan." I liked Ethan the first time I met him. He was gentle with her, he laughed at her jokes, and he called me ma'am without making it sound like a costume. Then Claire told me his last name, and something in my stomach shifted a half-inch to the left. Aldridge. In our city, you do not say the name Aldridge the way you say Johnson or Reyes. There are buildings with that name carved into the stone. There is a wing of the very hospital where I ladle soup that has a brass plaque with that name on it, and I have dusted around it more times than I can count. I told myself I was being foolish. Love does not check bank statements, I said. A good boy is a good boy. But I have spent my whole life reading rooms, because reading a room is how you keep a job like mine, and some quiet part of me already knew. A woman like me was about to walk into a world that had a very specific idea of where a woman like me belonged. I just did not yet know they would say it out loud. The engagement dinner was at their club, the kind with a gate and a man in a jacket at the gate. I wore my good navy suit, pressed twice, and I arrived 10 minutes early because being early is a habit poverty teaches you and never lets you drop. A young woman at the door took one look at me and asked if I was there to help with the coat check. I understood the mistake. I did not correct her sharply. "I'm the bride's mother," I said, and I watched her face do a small, embarrassed dance. Inside, the Aldridges were waiting. Vivian Aldridge shook my hand with 2 fingers, the way you hold something you are not sure is clean, and said it was so lovely to finally meet Claire's mother, and where was it again that I worked? When I told her, she said, "Oh, how wonderful honest work," in the voice you use for a child's drawing. At dinner, I was seated at the far end, past the cousins, next to an empty chair. Harold Aldridge sat at the head and did not speak to me once. I noticed all of it. I want to be clear about that because later people would ask why I stayed, why I smiled. I noticed the two fingers and the far chair and the phrase, honest work. I have been noticing rooms like that since I was 9 years old, waiting for my mother outside the houses she cleaned. But Claire was glowing at the other end of the table, her hand in Ethan's, and I had learned a long time ago that you can swallow almost anything if the person you love is happy on the far side of it. So I smiled, and I said the wine was lovely, and I drove home alone and sat in my car in the dark for a while before I went inside. Claire came by that week with a bag of my favorite oranges, which is what she does when she needs something and feels bad about it. She sat at my kitchen table and turned an orange over in her hands without peeling it. "Mom," she finally said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not be hurt." I told her to go ahead. "The Aldridges are a lot," she said. "Ethan's dad especially. Can you get along with them? For me? This family, it matters for us, for our future." I looked at my daughter, at the worry pulling her mouth tight, and I felt the old machinery in me start up. The machinery that has spent a lifetime deciding that my comfort is the cheapest thing in any room. "Of course, baby," I said. "It's your day. I won't be any trouble." She exhaled like I'd untied something around her chest. And that was the moment, if I'm honest, when I signed the contract without reading it. I agreed to be small. If you've ever made yourself smaller so someone you love could feel bigger, you already know the arithmetic of a night like the one coming. Stay with me, because it matters how this ends. And if this channel keeps finding you, that isn't an accident. Subscribe so the next one does too. What I did not tell Claire, sitting there watching her finally peel that orange, was that not being any trouble had a price tag I was about to put on a credit line, and that I would carry it long after the last dance. I was not going to come to my daughter's wedding empty-handed. Pride is a poor woman's inheritance, and it is the one thing nobody had ever been able to garnish. So I did the math at my kitchen table with a calculator that still had my late mother's tape in it, and I made a decision I told no one. I took out a home equity loan against the little house I had spent 20 years almost paying off. Not for a car, not for a cruise, for flowers and catering at a wedding in a world that would never notice. When Vivienne mentioned, in that airy way of hers, that they were handling everything, of course, but if I wanted to feel included, I could contribute toward the florals and the dinner, I wrote a check that made the bank teller glance up at me. I handed it to Vivienne myself. She took it with those same two fingers and said, "How thoughtful," and slid it into a leather folder without looking at the number. I told myself it did not matter that she did not look. I told myself the point was Claire, not the arithmetic. But I want you to hold on to that check because I am going to need you to remember it later, when I decided not to say a single word about it in front of 400 people who would have loved to watch me try. At the time, all I knew was that I had bought my way, at least a little, into being allowed at the table. That is what I believed money could do. I was 58 years old, and I was about to find out I had never understood their world at all. I decided to make my own dress. I could have bought one, but a store-bought dress felt like showing up in a rented version of myself. And besides, my hands have never known how to sit still when I am nervous. I chose a pale blue, the soft color of the sky an hour before the light gives out, because it was Claire's favorite color when she was small and used to fall asleep against my arm on the bus home. I cut the pattern on my living room floor after a double shift, kneeling until my knees complained, and I sewed it over 3 weeks of nights. An hour here, 40 minutes there, the machine humming while the neighborhood slept. I put French seams in it, the kind nobody sees, because my mother taught me that the inside of a thing is where you find out if it was made with love. I set the sleeves twice to get them right. I hemmed it by hand. When I held it up under the kitchen light, tired to the bone, I felt something I had not let myself feel in a long while, which was proud. Not of the dress exactly, of the woman who could still make something beautiful at midnight with cracked fingers after feeding a hospital all day. I hung it on the back of my bedroom door where I could see it, and every night for a week I looked at it before I turned off the light. That dress was going to be my way of standing up straight in a room built to make me stoop. I did not know yet that they would find a way to make even that beautiful thing feel like a mistake. But they would try. Over the next month, Vivian handled everything, and handling everything turned out to mean handling me right out of the picture. The venue was chosen and I was informed. The menu was set, and I was informed. When I offered to make the groom's cake, a recipe my mother had carried up from Georgia, Vivian smiled and said they'd already retained a pastry artist, and wasn't that a relief? One less thing for me to worry about. Little by little, every place I might have left a fingerprint was wiped clean. I understood what was happening, because I have watched it happen my whole life in 100 smaller rooms. It is not cruelty exactly, it is tidiness. People like the Aldridges do not hate people like me, they simply do not have a slot in their world where we go, so they file us under staff, or under charity, or under nothing at all, and they do it while smiling. The invitations went out under the Aldridge name. The website mentioned the Aldridge family's joy. My name, when it appeared once, in small type, as, and Ms. Jordan. Not even the bride's mother, and Ms. Jordan. I sat with that phrase for a long time one night, my finished blue dress hanging behind the door, and I felt the first real crack open in the story I had told myself for 24 years. Working hard was supposed to earn a place. Staying quiet was supposed to earn a place. But you cannot earn your way into a room that has already decided you are furniture. I did not have the words for that yet. I only had the ache. The ache would have to wait, because the wedding was coming, and I had promised to be no trouble at all. There was a planning lunch, 3 weeks out, at the Aldridge house. I came because Claire asked me to, and I sat on a sofa that cost more than my car while a coordinator ran through numbers on a tablet. She read the totals out loud, the florals and the dinner among them, and then she said the words that stopped my heart for a beat. And the Aldridge family is generously covering all of it. Not most of it. All of it. My check, the one I had borrowed against my house to write, had been folded so cleanly into their total that it had ceased to exist. I looked at Vivienne. She was arranging a cushion. I looked at Harold, who was reading something on his phone. Nobody looked back at me. I opened my mouth, and then I closed it, because Claire was sitting right there, radiant, believing the Aldridges were giving her the wedding of her dreams. And what was I going to do? Raise my hand and say, "Actually, some of those flowers are mine. I mortgaged the living room for them." I could not do that to her. So I let it disappear. That was the moment I learned what my money was really worth to people like that. Not nothing. Worse than nothing. It was worth being absorbed, swallowed, and rebranded as their generosity, so that even the thing I gave became one more reason to feel grateful to them. Money does not buy your way into their world. It buys your way further into their debt, even when you are the one who paid. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel, and I did not turn on the radio. I was starting to understand. I just had not yet understood how far they would take it. A week later, Vivienne asked to see what I was wearing. I brought the blue dress on a hanger, wrapped in a dry cleaning bag I had saved for the occasion, and I hung it in her front hall with more care than I have ever handled anything I owned. She unzipped the bag and looked at it the way you look at a casserole someone brought to a funeral. "Oh," she said. "You made this?" I told her I had. "It's very sweet," she said, and let the bag fall back over it. "Only, the family is all in ivory and champagne, you understand? That's the palette. So this blue will rather stand out in the photographs. Not that it matters. I just wouldn't want you to feel out of place. I have been told, in one way or another, my entire life, that I do not match. Wrong shoes, wrong car, wrong accent, wrong hands. But something about the way she said it over my blue dress, the dress I had built at midnight with my scarred fingers, landed different. She was not just telling me I did not match their color scheme. She was telling me I did not match their family, and that the kindest thing I could do was blend into the background until I disappeared. I zipped the bag back up myself. "I'll wear the blue," I said, quiet and even. She smiled like I had confirmed something she already believed about my kind and said, "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." I drove home and hung the dress back on my bedroom door. I looked at it a long time that night. I did not know it yet, but that dress was going to be the last thing I had left in that room that was truly only mine. I tried to talk to Claire. Just once. Really talk. Mother to daughter, the way we used to over cheap tea when the world got heavy. I made the tea. I told her gently that I did not think Ethan's parents thought much of me, and that I could feel myself being erased a little more each week, and that I did not want to walk into her wedding feeling like a stranger at my own child's happiest day. I did not raise my voice. I did not name the check. I just told her the truth of what my heart was carrying, and I watched my daughter, who I love more than my own breath, put her face in her hands and start to cry, not for me, but from exhaustion. "Mom, please," she said. "Please don't make this hard. I am holding this whole thing together with tape. Vivian is impossible. Harold is worse. Ethan won't stand up to them. And if you start to, I can't." She wiped her eyes. "Can you just get through the one day? For me? I promise. After the wedding, it'll be different." I looked at her, and I made the oldest mistake I know how to make. I decided her exhaustion was heavier than my dignity. I decided, one more time, that the loving thing was to swallow it. "Okay, baby," I said, and I reached across the table and took her hand, and I felt her relief travel up my arm like a current. But something in me had gone very still and very cold, and I would not understand what it was until 3 weeks later. She had asked me to disappear for one day, and she did not even know she was asking it, because I had spent her whole life teaching her that my disappearing was normal. That was the lesson I had drilled into her without meaning to, and I was about to have to unteach it in front of 400 people. I did not understand Harold Aldridge until later, so let me tell you what I saw before I understood it. He was a big man who moved through his own house like a landlord inspecting it. He corrected the staff in front of guests. He corrected his wife in front of the staff. At one gathering, I watched him send back a bottle of wine, then a second, then dress down a young waiter for the crime of bringing what he'd asked for. There was a coldness in him that was not lazy, the way some cold people are lazy. His was busy. He was always measuring, always sorting, always deciding in the first 3 seconds of meeting someone whether they were above him or below, and adjusting his face accordingly. With me, the face he chose was the one you give a delivery you did not order. I remember thinking, this man works very hard at something, and I could not figure out what. Men born to money are usually careless with it, careless with everyone, because they have never once feared falling. Harold was not careless. Harold guarded. He guarded the seating, the palette, the family name, the exact temperature of every interaction, like a man standing watch on a wall. I did not know yet what he was watching for. I filed it away, the way I file everything, and I went back to being no trouble. But I will tell you now what I learned at that reception, because it changes how you see everything he did. Harold Aldridge was not defending a throne he was born on. He was defending a door he had barely squeezed through himself, and he had spent 30 years terrified that someone would notice he did not belong on the inside of it any more than I did. I finished the last of the dress at 3 a.m, 4 days before the wedding. I had come home from a double, my feet swollen inside my shoes, and I could not sleep. So I sat down at the machine one more time to fix a seam that had been bothering me and ended up doing the whole hem again by hand. When I was done, I stood in my kitchen under the one good light and I pressed it, panel by panel, the iron hissing, the blue going smooth and clean under my hands. And I made myself a promise. Out loud, alone, at 3 a.m. like a crazy woman. "I am going to wear this dress," I said, "and I am going to stand up straight in it, and I am not going to apologize for the color." It was the first promise I had made to myself, and not to Claire or the kitchen or the bank, in longer than I could remember. I hung it on the door and I looked at those French seams nobody would ever see, And I thought about my mother teaching me that the inside is where the love hides. The next afternoon, Claire stopped by, and she saw the dress hanging there, finished. She went very quiet. She touched the sleeve, the one I had set twice, and I saw her throat move. "You made this," she said. And it was not a question this time, not the way Vivienne had asked it. It was almost an apology. "It's beautiful, Mom. I'm sorry I—" And then she stopped. Because whatever she was about to be sorry for was too big to say out loud in my little kitchen 4 days before her wedding. I told her it was fine. It was not fine, but I told her it was, because that is the language we spoke. Remember the blue dress? Remember the 3 in the morning, and the seams nobody would see. You are going to need them at the microphone. At the rehearsal dinner, Harold gave a speech about family. He talked about legacy, about the Aldridge name, about how a marriage is really a merger of houses, and he raised his glass to Ethan and to the fine young woman joining our family. He did not say Claire's name. He did not look at me at all. Afterward, an older cousin of Vivienne's, a woman softened by 3 glasses of wine, sat beside me and patted my knee like we were conspirators. "Don't let Harold frighten you," she said. "He plays the lord of the manor, but between us he came from absolutely nothing. Married Vivienne when he was selling insurance. Papa nearly had a stroke." She laughed and drifted off, and I sat there holding that piece of information like a stone I had found in a field. Harold came from nothing. Harold, who guarded every door, who measured every guest, who could not look at the hospital cook who had raised his son's bride, had once been the man at the far end of somebody else's table. It did not make me feel sorry for him. Not yet. Not exactly. But it turned a key in a lock I had not known was there. The people who guard the wall the hardest, I thought, are the ones who remember climbing it. It did not excuse a thing he did, but it explained the busyness of his coldness, the way he was always sorting, always deciding who was below. He was not sorting other people. He was checking, over and over, that he himself had not slipped back down to where he started. I tucked the stone in my pocket, and I said good night. And I drove home to my little house and my blue dress, and I slept better than I had in weeks, though I could not have told you why. 2 days before the wedding, I overheard Vivienne on the phone in her garden while I waited to drop off a box of the favors I'd insisted on assembling by hand. "Oh, we're giving them everything," she was saying, laughing. "The whole day, top to bottom. It's what family does, isn't it? You give the children the world?" Everything, top to bottom. My mortgaged flowers and my borrowed dinner, given by them, to my daughter, as proof of what family does. I stood on the flagstones with a box of ribboned almonds in my arms, and I felt the last of my old story burn off like fog. I had thought that if I gave enough, they would have to see me. Instead, everything I gave simply became more of them. I did not confront her. I set the favors on the table and I said they could arrange them however they liked, and I left. I know some of you are already ahead of me, already angry on my behalf. Hold on to that. There is a moment coming that I did not plan and could not take back. And I am going to need you there for it. Comment the word kitchen if you have ever been put in your place at your own family's table. I read everyone. On the drive home, I did not cry. And that is not a figure of speech. It is a fact I noticed about myself with some surprise. I had passed the place where crying lived. I had arrived somewhere flatter and harder and, in a strange way, calmer. I did not know what I was going to do. I only knew that some line inside me, a line I had let people step over my whole life, had finally, quietly, been drawn. The night before the wedding, I did something I am not proud of, and something I understand completely. I called Claire and I offered to stay home. I told her I could say I was sick. I told her it might be easier, cleaner, that she could enjoy her day without worrying about her mother in the wrong color at the wrong table. I meant it as love. I had spent 24 years believing that the most loving thing I could do was remove myself from any room where my presence might cost my daughter something. It was the deepest groove in me, worn so smooth I could not feel it as a choice anymore. Claire went silent on the phone. Then she started to cry, and this time it was not from exhaustion. "Mom," she said. If you are not there, none of it means anything. Do you understand me? You are the only reason any of this exists. Please, please come. And so I said I would come. I want you to see clearly what happened there, because people will say I walked into that room like a lamb. I did not. I saw the danger. I tried to protect my daughter from it by taking myself out of it, which was the only tool I had ever been given. And she asked me, through tears, to be there. Because some part of her needed her mother in that room, even if she did not yet know how to make space for her in it. I could not say no to that. No mother could. So I hung up the phone, and I laid the blue dress across the chair by my bed, and I lay awake looking at it in the dark, and I told myself, whatever tomorrow is, you will not disappear from it. I could not sleep. So near dawn I got up and made tea and sat at my table, the same table where Claire had done her homework, where her father's absence had once felt like a hole in the floor. I thought about my mother. I thought about her hands, which were my hands now, and about the thing she used to say when someone made her feel small, the thing I had said to a crying infant 26 years ago. We don't beg for a seat. We build our own table. I had said those words to Claire, too, when she was little and came home crying because a girl at school had a bigger house. I wondered if she remembered. I doubted it. Children absorb the lessons you live, not the ones you say, and the lesson I had lived, day after exhausting day, was the opposite one. Make yourself small. Be no trouble. Take the far chair and be grateful. I had built my daughter a table and then spent her whole childhood teaching her that the people at the big table were the ones who mattered. I sat there as the sky went the exact pale blue of my dress, an hour before the light gives out, only running the other way, an hour before it arrives, and I thought, today my daughter marries into the big table. And I do not know, until I am standing in it, what kind of mother I am going to be in that room. I finished my tea. I washed the cup. I laid out the dress, and my mother's small gold earrings, and the shoes I had polished the night before. Whatever was coming, I would meet it clean and pressed and on time. It is the only way I have ever known how to walk into anything. The Aldridge estate on the day of the wedding looked like a magazine had come to life and started serving champagne. There was a tent the size of my whole street, white and gold, with chandeliers hanging from the poles like frozen fireworks. There was a string quartet on a riser, and a lawn mowed into stripes, and 400 chairs in perfect rows, and everywhere I looked, ivory and champagne, a sea of pale gold silk and cream linen and beige tuxedos. And then there was me, in my soft blue dress, moving through it like a single wrong note in a song everyone else had rehearsed. I felt it the second I stepped out of my car. Heads turning, that small recalculation in the eyes the sorting herald had taught me to see. Who is that? And where does she go? I lifted my chin the way I had promised myself I would, and I walked in, and I found Claire in a room off the side, in her gown, and for one perfect minute the whole world narrowed to my daughter's face. She was so beautiful, I forgot to be anything but her mother. You made it, she whispered, and she touched my sleeve, the blue sleeve, and I saw her decide not to say anything about the color. I fixed a curl that had come loose by her ear the way I had fixed her hair 1,000 mornings before school. You look like your grandmother, I told her, which was the highest thing I knew how to say. Then a coordinator swept in to take her, and I was handed off into the crowd, and the sorting eyes closed back over me, and I went to find where a woman like me was supposed to stand. It started before the ceremony even began, in small ways, the way these things always do. A man in a beige tux handed me his empty glass without looking at me and said, "Another, when you get a chance." A woman asked me where the ladies' room was, and when I said I wasn't sure, she frowned like I had failed at my job. Someone else pressed a folded coat into my arms and walked off. I stood there holding a stranger's coat in my blue dress, and I understood, with a clarity that was almost restful, that to these 400 people I was not the mother of the bride. I was staff. I had walked into the tent and the room had filed me exactly where Harold files everyone, under below, under help, under invisible. and it had done it in the first 3 seconds before I said a word. I could have made a scene. I could have announced myself, loudly, corrected each one, demanded my place. But I had promised Claire I would be no trouble, and old promises are heavy things, and the ceremony was starting. So I laid the coat gently over an empty chair, and I found a seat near the back, and I sat down. I want you to sit with me in that chair for a moment, holding my own 2 hands in my lap, wearing the dress I built at midnight, being handed empty glasses by people who would spend fortunes to avoid touching my life. Because everything that came later, everything the whole room would freeze around, was born in that chair, in the long, quiet minute when I decided, for the very last time in my life, to be no trouble. It was the last time. I just did not know it yet. The ceremony itself was beautiful, and I will not pretend otherwise, because pretending would cheapen what came after. Claire walked down that aisle on no one's arm, because she had told me she wanted to walk to Ethan the way she'd done everything else, on her own 2 feet, and I sat in the back and watched my whole life go by in a white dress. I saw the 2-year-old on my shoulder. I saw the girl at the kitchen counter. I saw the fevers I sat up through and the school shoes I bought a size too big so they'd last, and the nights I sewed until my eyes crossed. And I saw where all of it had led, to this straight-backed young woman promising her life to a good man in a garden full of chandeliers. When she said her vows, her voice did not shake. When Ethan said his, he cried, and I liked him better for it. They kissed, and 400 people applauded, and I clapped until my scarred hands stung. And for a moment I was not staff. I was not the wrong color. I was not and Ms. Jordan. I was a mother watching her child cross safely to the other side of something. That is the cruelest part of a night like this, if you want to know. They let you all the way up. They let you feel for one shining hour that you belong to the joy, that the sacrifice was worth it and the world can be kind. They lift you all the way to the top of the stairs. And then, when your guard is down and your heart is open and your eyes are still wet with pride, that is exactly when they choose to remind you where the help eats. At the reception, I went looking for my seat, and I found it the way you find the last kid picked for a team. There was a seating chart on an easel in gold calligraphy, and I ran my finger down it looking for Jordan. And there I was, table 19. I looked out over the tent for table 19. It was in the far back corner, tucked against a folding partition, and behind that partition, I could hear it, was the service kitchen, the clatter of trays, the hiss of the pass, the sounds I have lived inside for 30 years. They had seated the mother of the bride at the table closest to the kitchen. The head table, up on its dais under the biggest chandelier, held the Aldridges, the grandparents, Vivian in champagne silk, Harold like a judge, and Claire, my Claire, up there in the light. And me, at table 19, with a retired couple who kept asking if I worked with the caterer. I sat down. I put my napkin in my lap. I could smell the kitchen behind me, the same steam and starch I smell every morning of my life, and I thought, there is a kind of honesty in this at least. They have finally seated me where they have always believed I belong, not with the family, adjacent to it, near enough to serve, far enough to ignore. I looked up at the dais, at my daughter laughing at something, at the empty air where a mother should have been sitting, and something that had been very still in me for 3 weeks began, quietly, to move. I did not know yet what it would do, but it had started, and there was no putting it back. Before the toasts, I got up to find the restroom, and I took a wrong turn near the service hall, and that is where I saw Harold. He was standing alone by a side door, half in shadow, and he did not know anyone was watching. The lord of the manor was gone. His shoulders were up around his ears. He was staring out at his own party, 400 people he had paid to impress, and his face was not proud. It was afraid. He tugged at his cuffs. He straightened a painting on the wall that was already straight. He looked, for one unguarded moment, exactly like a man who had wandered into a room he was not sure he was allowed in, and was waiting to be found out. And I remembered the cousin's wine-soft words. Came from nothing. Selling insurance. Papa nearly had a stroke. I stood there and I saw him whole for the first time, and I will be honest with you, because this story does not work if I lie. For 1 second, I felt sorry for him. Here was a man who had climbed all the way up and never once in 30 years been able to sit down. Who guarded the door so fiercely because he could still feel the cold on the other side of it. Who looked at me and saw not a stranger but a mirror, the woman he had spent his whole life running from becoming. That is why he could not stand me, not because I was beneath him, because I was what he was terrified of being. The sympathy lasted exactly 1 second. Then he saw me seeing him, and his face slammed shut like a bank vault, and the judge came back, and I understood that he would never forgive me for that second as long as he lived. The toasts began, and Harold took the microphone first because of course he did. He stood on the dais under the big chandelier and he told 400 people the story of the day, and in his story, there was no me at all. He talked about how proud the Aldridges were to give Ethan and Claire such a beginning. He talked about the flowers, my flowers, and the dinner, my dinner, and he said, "We wanted to give these two everything, and I think you'll agree we have." People laughed and lifted their glasses. He talked about the Aldridge legacy that Claire was now lucky enough to join, as though my daughter had been rescued from something, as though the 24 years I had spent building her had been a waiting room she'd finally been let out of. I sat at table 19 with the smell of the kitchen at my back, and I watched a man who came from nothing stand in borrowed light and erase me from my own daughter's wedding, using my own money to do it. And I felt the last thing let go inside me, not with a snap, with a kind of exhale. All my life I had believed that if I gave enough and stayed quiet enough, one day I would be seen. And here was the final proof, in gold calligraphy and champagne silk, that the deal had never been real. You cannot be quiet enough to be seen by people who need you invisible. I looked up at Claire, and she was not laughing anymore. She was looking at the empty seat beside her on the dais, and then she was looking out across the tent, searching, and her eyes found mine, all the way in the back, by the kitchen, and I saw her realize where they had put her mother. And then I stood up. I did not stand up to make a scene. I want that on the record. I stood up because Claire's face had crumpled, and every instinct in my body pulled me toward my child, the way it had pulled me toward her crib at every cough for 26 years. I started walking up the side of the tent toward the dais, toward my daughter in my blue dress, with no plan in my head except to get to her. And Harold saw me coming. He was still holding the microphone. He watched the woman in blue walk up out of the back corner, out of table 19, out of the place he had assigned me, moving toward the family table in front of all his guests, and something in him could not allow it. Maybe he saw the mirror again. Maybe he just could not stand the disorder of it, the wrong piece moving to the wrong square. He lowered the microphone and he lifted his hand, and he pointed one finger straight at me across 400 people, and his voice came through the speakers cold and clear and final. "The help," he said, "eats in the kitchen." For a moment nobody moved. The string quartet had stopped between songs. A fork stilled against a plate somewhere and did not fall. I stood in the middle of the aisle in the dress I had built at midnight, pointed at like a stain, told in front of my daughter's entire new world exactly what they had all decided I was. And here is the thing I need you to understand about that moment, the moment everything turned. I was not humiliated. I had expected humiliation, had braced for it for weeks, and it did not come. What came instead, rising up through 30 years of kitchens and one hand-sewn blue dress, was the strangest, steadiest calm I have ever felt in my life, because he had finally, out loud, in front of witnesses, said the quiet thing, and now I got to answer it. Here is what nobody in that tent could see, in the second after Harold's finger dropped. I was standing at a fork, and it was not the one they thought. The easy road, the one I had walked my whole life, was to sit down, to find table 19 again, to lower my eyes, to let Claire's day survive the moment by making myself small enough to disappear under it. That was the loving thing. That was the no trouble thing. That was the road that kept my place in this family, whatever thin place that was, and let the photographs come out clean. And I felt the pull of it. God help me, even then. But there was another road, and I could see exactly where it went. If I stood up, if I answered, I might crack this wedding down the middle. I might cost Claire the in-laws, the future she'd begged me to protect, the whole world she was marrying into. I might walk out of here having lost my daughter to save my own pride. That was the price, and I priced it honestly, standing there in the aisle. Nobody was going to hand me a clean victory. Whatever I did next, I was going to win one thing only by losing another. And in that pointing, frozen second, I understood the choice was not really about Harold at all. It was about what my daughter was going to learn in the next 60 seconds, about what her mother was worth, and about what she herself was allowed to demand from a room. I had taught her to be small for 26 years. I had one chance, one, to teach her something else, and it was going to cost me everything I had spent those years buying. I made my choice. I did not sit down. I walked to the microphone. It was not far, 20 steps maybe, but it was the longest walk of my life, and I remember every one of them. My blue dress moved around me. My polished shoes were quiet on the wooden floor. 400 people watched the help walk toward the microphone, and not one of them knew what to do, because this was not in the script, and people like that are lost without a script. Harold was still holding it when I reached the dais. Up close, I could see his composure was already going. His hand had a small tremor in it. He had expected me to shrink, and I had not shrunk, and a man who has built his whole life on people shrinking has no plan for a woman who simply keeps walking. "This is a family moment," he started to say, "if you would please." But his voice had lost its judge's edge. I did not raise mine. I have learned that the quietest voice in a loud room is the one everyone leans in to hear. I looked at him, and then I reached out, calmly, and I took the microphone from his hand. He let me. To this day, I do not fully understand why he let me, except that certainty is a kind of authority, and I was, for the first time in my life, entirely certain. The quartet did not start up. The clatter behind the partition had gone still, as if even the kitchen was listening for its own. I turned to face the room, 400 faces in ivory and champagne, my daughter frozen white on the dais beside me, and I lifted the microphone, and the whole tent held its breath. I was 58 years old, and I had never in my life said the thing I was about to say. I did not talk about the check. Understand that. It would have been so easy. I could have told 400 people that the flowers Harold bragged about were mine, that the dinner in front of them was bought with a loan against my house, that the generous Aldridge family had been reselling a poor woman's mortgage as their own good breeding all night long. It would have leveled him. It would have been the money answer, the scoreboard answer, dollars against dollars, and it would have meant he won, because it would have meant I agreed with him that what a person is worth can be added up in a leather folder. I was done agreeing with him, so I did not say a word about the money. I looked out at that room, and I let the silence stretch until it belonged to me, and then I said the only sentence that mattered. "For 26 years, I said, I fed strangers in a kitchen so that my daughter would never once have to earn her seat at anyone's table. And I will not spend the last hour of her wedding teaching her that a person's worth is something the rich get to hand out." That was all. I did not shout it. I said it the way you say a true thing you have known for a long time and only just found the room quiet enough to say in. And I set the microphone down on the table gently, the way you set down something that is finished. The room froze. I mean, it went to glass. 400 people who had spent all night knowing exactly where everyone belonged suddenly did not know where to put their eyes. Vivienne's smile had fallen off her face and not been replaced with anything. Harold's mouth was open and no sound was coming out of it, because I had not fought him on his own ground, and a man like that only knows how to win the fight he started. And Claire, up on that dais in her white dress, was staring at her mother in the blue dress like she was seeing me, all the way down to the French seams, for the very first time. And then I did the thing that cost the most, the thing no one saw coming, least of all me. I turned, and I walked toward the door. Not toward the kitchen he'd banished me to, and not toward the head table I'd been denied. Toward the exit. Because I understood something in that frozen second that I want you to understand too. I could not win a seat at their table. I had spent 3 weeks and 24 years and a second mortgage learning that, finally, all the way down. The only thing left worth having was the one thing they could not give me and could not take, which was the right to stop asking. So I stopped asking. I walked down the long aisle toward the open flap of the tent, past the ivory and the champagne, past 400 silent people, in my blue dress, with my head up and my scarred, useful, beautiful hands, steady at my sides. And here is the part that was the price, the part that was not triumph, but loss, happening in the exact same breath. I did not know if Claire would follow me. I was walking out of my only child's wedding, maybe out of her marriage, maybe out of half her life, on the chance that teaching her she was worth more mattered more than being there to see her cake cut. I had made peace with it in the 20 steps to the microphone, and now I was living it, one footfall at a time, toward the light in the doorway, not looking back, because if I looked back and she was not moving, I did not think my legs would hold. So I did not look back. I just walked, and I let the loss and the freedom arrive together, which is the only way I have learned they ever come. I was almost at the door when I heard it. Not a voice at first, a sound. The sharp, uneven click of high heels being kicked off and hitting a wooden floor, one and then the other, and then bare feet running. I stopped. I turned. And there was my daughter coming down the aisle after me in her white gown with her shoes in her hand, past her new husband, past Harold, past 400 people, running the way she used to run to me across a playground when she was 5, and the world had gotten too big. She reached me and she took my hand, my rough hand, in both of hers, and she was crying, but not the exhausted crying and not the ashamed crying. Something new. "You built me a table," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, her voice shaking but not stopping. "You always told me, we don't beg for a seat, we build our own table. I forgot. I'm so sorry, Mom. I forgot." And she turned. My Claire, my straight-backed girl. And she looked back at that dais, at the family she had married into an hour before, and she said, clear as a bell in the frozen room, "My mother and I are going to go get some air. When we come back in, she sits with me." Nobody stopped us. Ethan was on his feet, I saw, his face torn between his father and his wife, and that was his war to fight now, not mine. Harold had sat down heavily in his judge's chair, and my daughter walked me out of that tent barefoot, in her wedding dress, holding my hand, into the ordinary evening air, and for the first time in her whole life, I was not the one making myself small so that she could stand tall. We were just standing, the two of us, together, at last. I would love to tell you the Aldridges were transformed, that Harold wept and apologized and learned. That is not what happened, and I promised you the truth. Harold has not spoken to me since, and I expect he never will, because I made him look, for 1 second in front of everyone, at the frightened man behind the judge, and people do not forgive you for that. Vivienne sent a stiff note through a lawyer about the unfortunate scene. Their world closed back over the moment like water over a dropped stone, exactly as smooth as before. That force is still out there, running its rooms, deciding who belongs. I did not defeat it. No one woman defeats a thing like that. But something did change, in the only place it was ever mine to change. Claire and I came back into that reception, and she sat me down in the empty chair beside her on the dais, and we ate our dinner up in the light, and I did not touch a single fork until I was good and ready. The marriage survived, though it is a different marriage now, one where Ethan had to learn to stand between his wife and his father, and where Claire learned she was allowed to ask him to. Some months later, she found out about the loan, the flowers, the house I'd borrowed against. Not from me. I never once used it. She sat at my kitchen table and cried about it, and then she and Ethan quietly paid it back, not as a debt owed to me, but as a wrong being set right. I let them, because refusing would have been just another way of making myself small, and I am done with that. I am done being no trouble. It turns out I am worth a little trouble after all. These days, Claire comes over on Sundays. She sits at my kitchen table, the same one where she did her homework, the same one where I once did the math on a mortgage in the dark. Sometimes Ethan comes too, and he is learning, slowly, the way a good man raised in a cold house learns, that there is more warmth at my little table than in all the chandeliers he grew up under. I still work in the kitchen at the hospital. I still feed strangers I will never meet. But I do not carry it the way I used to, hunched, apologizing, waiting to be told where I go. I set the trays down like a woman who knows her own worth is not up for a vote. And when my daughter has a daughter of her own someday, which she tells me she wants, that little girl is going to grow up knowing a thing it took me 58 years and one blue dress to learn. She will not learn to be small. She will not learn to earn her seat with silence. She will learn what my mother knew, and what I finally lived out loud in a tent full of strangers, and what Claire said back to me barefoot on a wooden floor. The chain broke in that room. It broke in me. So here is the only thing I know for certain. After 30 years of kitchens and one sentence into a microphone, we don't beg for a seat at anyone's table. We build our own, and everyone we love is welcome at it. 30 years of kitchens, one blue dress, one sentence, and a room full of strangers that finally went quiet. If anyone ever tried to seat you at the far table in your own family, you already know what my daughter learned that night. You do not have to shrink to be loved. Build your table, and fill it with the ones who show up. If this story reached you, tell me below, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.